The following program discusses sensitive issues related to sexuality. Parents are cautioned this presentation may be too candid for younger audiences.
Welcome to Intimate Clarity. I'm Jason Bradley, and I'm here with Jennifer Jill Schwarzer, and she is a licensed professional counselor. And today we're going to be discussing a very sensitive topic, but it's a conversation we need to have. Jen, what is transgenderism, and how is it developed?
Good question, and I'm really feeling sensitive about answering it because I know that there are people out there that are struggling with transgenderism, and I know that there are people that love people that are struggling with transgenderism, and I know there are a wide variety of views on this issue, and I'm going to try to explain it in the most tactful and loving and yet biblically grounded way that I can, and scientifically grounded way that I can. So, transgenderism is essentially when an individual identifies themselves as the opposite sex. So I, as a woman, would be transgender if I thought I was a man, or if I intensely wanted to be a man, and then also identified as a man. Or you would be transgender if you identified yourself as a woman. So let me give a little history about the diagnosis. The previous revision of the Diagnostic Manual of the American Psychiatric Association called it gender identity disorder. Now, the transgender people didn't really like that because they felt that it pathologized their condition. The diagnosis of homosexuality had been taken out of the Diagnostic Manual in 1973. And the transgender people said, well, we don't want to be in there either. We don't want our condition to be pathologized. They say we're just one more variant on a rainbow of choices, and homosexuals would say the same thing.
See, that's interesting to me because, like, before it was identified as a disorder, now it's being taught to kids in school.
That's right. It's being totally normalized, and I would even say a little glorified in some cases as something very interesting. So now, recently, the Diagnostic Manual was revised in 2015, and now it's called gender dysphoria. See, the problem with taking it completely out of the Diagnostic Manual is that then transgender people would not be able to get insurance coverage, and their condition, in their thinking, requires them to have hormone medication and also to sometimes have surgery to transition, and they need insurance coverage to be able to do that. So in order to get insurance coverage, you need a diagnosis. So they left it in the Diagnostic Manual, but it is now called gender dysphoria. So the thing that is pathological is not the fact that I'm a woman, I want to be a man, or you're a man, you want to be a woman. It's the distress that you feel that accompanies that leads to the diagnosis. So that enabled them to stay in the manual, get their insurance coverage, and still not be pathologized in their thinking. So it's weird, though, that every other type of misperception of one's physical self is still considered pathological. So some examples of that would be anorexia. And I've been through anorexia, and I know when you are anorexic, you think you're fat, even though you're very thin. Even though you're underweight, you think you're overweight. That's pathological. I've been through that. It's a cognitive distortion, and it's a disorder to think that way. Another example is body dysmorphia. Body dysmorphia is when a person feels extremely self-conscious about the way they look. But who it typically afflicts is very attractive people that think they're atrociously ugly, or often it can afflict those people. That's considered pathological because your perception of yourself is very far away from the physical reality.
Is that kind of along the lines of that body shaming kind of thing?
It kind of comes along with that. There's another condition that has never made it into the diagnostical manual, but it may someday, and it's called body identity integrity disorder. And what it is individuals who identify themselves as not having, for instance, a limb. Maybe they see themselves as being without a leg, and it will actually drive that person to seek an amputation. Now, I think that, yeah, I know.
Wait a minute.
It's a rare thing, but it's a real thing.
So somebody will think that they don't have an extremity, whether it's an arm, a leg, or whatever, and it'll drive them to want to get it amputated, their functioning leg,
to get their identity, their self-perception to line up with the physical reality of who they are.
Wow.
And I think possibly the reason it's never made it into the diagnostic manual is because the implications are very clear. They're taking off perfectly healthy appendages in the same way people who transition are taking off perfectly healthy organs. And so I think that there's a little bit too much crossover there, possibly.
Yes.
But let's get some rest from this distressing stuff, and let's look at the Bible and what it says about human nature. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 23 says, "May your spirit, soul, and body be preserved complete." So you see this holism. It's what I call biblical holism.
Okay.
The soul does not exist separate from the body. That idea came into Christianity through what we call the Great Compromise about 3 centuries after Christ, when the church wanted to include more people from paganism, and so it lowered the standards in various areas, doctrinally and lifestyle standards, to get more people to join the church. That's not something we're totally foreign to. And one of the things that came in, one of the heresies that came in, is this Greek idea that the body and the mind were separate or dichotomized. It's called Greek dualism. So the thinking was that the body is evil, the soul has the spark of the divine, and the soul will continue to live throughout eternity apart from the body.
Oh, wow.
Once that got imported into Christianity, then we started to develop false doctrines, such as the idea that people go immediately to heaven or hell upon death, or the idea that there's an ever-burning hell. If the soul is eternal, it's got to live for eternity, and so it has to go somewhere, and if it's not in heaven with God, it's got to go somewhere, and so this idea of ever-burning hell developed over time. That's all the result of seeing the soul as something that can live apart from the body. That's all the result of a loss of the biblical concept of holism.
Okay.
So you can see where this idea of transgenderism would be a fruit of that. My soul is something totally different from my body. But biblical teaching says to anchor our identity in who we are physically, who we are in reality. So, I mean, there are lots of equivalents of this. I'm sure being a young person you can identify. You wish you were, you know, a famous basketball player or a rock star or something.
I feel, you know, it's interesting because when you're actually walking in your purpose, like you're so happy and content in that because it's your purpose. It's what God has given you to do. So I'm happy being me.
Good. I'm glad
because God is blessed.
So the million-dollar question is, has there been any science that has shown that there's such a thing as a woman's brain in a man's body or vice versa? And in fact, they have found that there are some differences in a brain of a transgender person. But this is a quotation from a study that was published in the journal The New Atlantis. And it says, in short, the current studies on associations between brain structure and transgender identity are small, methodologically limited, inconclusive, and sometimes contradictory. So they're not real strong, this idea of differences in brain structure. But then it goes on to say, even if they were more methodologically reliable, they would be insufficient to demonstrate that brain structure is a cause rather than an effect of gender identity behavior, because what happens when people behave a certain way, if I was, as a woman, started behaving like a man, it would change my brain. So it's impossible to know whether those changes, which were not measured before I started to transition, because there's just not enough research on it, happened. Well, what came first, the chicken or the egg? You know, the fact that I thought I was transgender, was that my brain different, led me to change, or the behaviors that I engaged in actually changed my brain. So we really don't know yet. We have not identified female brain in male body or vice versa.
Okay.
So I want to say this, though. It's very important that I say that I am not denying the problem. And I'm not belittling people that struggle with this. I've been through it. Not transgenderism, but I've been through cognitive distortion where I thought I was something that I wasn't. And I would say I still honestly struggle with body dysmorphia. I'm very self-conscious about the way that I look, and sometimes I do dysfunctional things to cope with that. So I'm not putting myself on a different plane than people. I think people with transgenderism they have a bigger struggle going on than I do. I feel for them. I'm not denying the problem. It happens. It happens in children, it happens in teens, it happens in adults. They believe that they are the other sex. That's a very uncomfortable and distressing experience. I'm not denying the problem. What I'm denying is the solution, because I think what's being put across to people is just transition physically. As if, Shazam, you take these hormones, you get the surgery, you're going to be the opposite sex, but you're not, because you never change your DNA.
Yeah, and then you're introducing the issue. It's almost like you're denying your very existence. You know, you're denying who you actually are. You know, so it's like you're denying your very existence, and so it's a very confusing thing.
It is. And working with people that have this kind of confusion is a delicate process. You know, you can see how certain things could lead into transgender tendencies. For instance, if maybe the boy as a child was a little more effeminate than your average rough and tumble boy, and he was part of a family system that over stereotyped male behavior, and he was told, oh, you're acting like a girl, you're just that's the thing that girls do, you know, because he liked colors and he liked art and he liked flowers, you know, and he was told that that wasn't right for you. Can see where he would start to identify himself as a girl locked in a boy's body. And in fact, I've known people that have been through that. Yeah, so there are certain things that can lead up to it. If the individual's parent wanted a child of the other sex, what's going to happen internally to that child? He's going to start to wish, potentially anyway, that he was the other sex.
I've heard about that happening. I've heard about parents putting a dress on the boy or boy clothes on the girl because they wanted another child, you know, and that they're introducing that confusion to the kid.
There are a lot of developmental factors that can lead people down this avenue, and I think there could be even biological tendencies that would set them up for it, although we haven't been able to identify them clearly yet. But there are definitely a confluence of factors that come together to create the struggles that people individually suffer through. And I don't want to minimize those struggles, and I don't want to belittle anybody, no matter what they choose. God, you know, if you've chosen to transition or if you're choosing to God still loves you. He will love you no matter what you do for the rest of your life, because that's just how God is. But I don't know that transitioning is a solution to the problem. I believe that this rush toward transitioning is giving people an easy out of a problem that is better addressed in counseling. It's better addressed in doing the hard work of sorting out our motives. And of course, the Holy Spirit and the presence of Jesus in your life and that security you get from knowing that you're accepted no matter what can really help catalyze that process and make it easier to face who we are, and also to have hope in who we can become in Him.
Amen.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it goes back to the fact that people can gain the victory through Christ. You know, people can gain that victory. So there's so much on this topic.
So much here,
much on this subject.
And we're going to have a couple of other programs that address different facets of it, because it is too big of a topic to cover in 15 minutes.
Yes.
But it's a conversation we need to have.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a sensitive topic, but it's definitely one that we need to have.
Amen.
And I'm so glad that we are here having this conversation, or well, we had this conversation, because we've got to go. But if you want more resources, then go to intimateclarity.tv. See you next time. God bless.